Welcome back to the woods. Find a quiet place, maybe a cup of tea or something warm, and let's step together into a slower world, where the days pass gently and small creatures live simple, beautiful lives beneath the trees. The brookside bench. The rain had stopped some time before dawn, leaving the forest damp and glistening. Every blade of grass was tipped with a drop of silver, and the brook that curved through the valley ran clearer than glass. The world smelled of wet bark, mushrooms, and the first shy sweetness of autumn, that green-gold scent that comes when the leaves are just beginning to turn. At the edge of the water, beneath a leaning willow, sat a little bench made of driftwood and smooth stones. It had been there for years, no one quite remembering who had built it. The forest folks simply called it the brookside bench, and it served as a place for anyone to pause a while, to rest a paw, dry a feather, or share a small thought over a larger silence. On this particular morning, Wren the Stoat was the first to arrive. She carried a small basket over one arm and wore her green kerchief tied neatly under her chin. Her fur was sleek from the mist, and she moved with her usual briskness, as if the air itself needed tidying. She set down her basket, and looked out over the water. The brook murmured quietly, slipping around smooth stones and under fern roots. A kingfisher darted past, a flash of blue, and vanished upstream. From somewhere behind the hazels came the sound of rustling and low humming. A moment later, Pip the vole appeared, balancing an umbrella twice his height over his shoulder. He blinked when he saw Wren. "Oh, morning, Wren. I didn't expect company." "There's always company if you arrive after sunrise," Wren said cheerfully. "You're up late." "I was checking on the dike wall near the mill pond," Pip said, lowering his umbrella. The rain raised the water again. "I had to shore it with moss and clay." "You'll work yourself into a puddle. You will," Wren said, but kindly. "Sit down, Pip. How about oatcakes?" That last bit worked like a charm. Pip sat at once. Wren opened her basket, and the smell of fresh oatcakes drifted out. Warm, nutty, with a hint of rosemary. She handed one to Pip and another to a passing robin who had stopped on the back of the bench to see what was what. They ate in companionable quiet. The oatcakes were crisp at the edges and soft in the middle. The brook burbled contentedly, as if approving. "Did you hear," Pip said after a while, brushing crumbs from his whiskers, "that Bran's beehives were knocked over last night? He says it must have been the wind." Wren frowned. "Wind strong enough to tip a badger's hives? I doubt that." I said the same. "Maybe a fox nosing about. Perhaps. He's gone to ask around. I told him I'd help him write the boxes later." "Good of you," Wren said. "You've the paws for it. I'd only make a mess." Pip smiled modestly, though he liked being called useful. The sun began to break through then, and the mist lifted in threads across the meadow. The damp grass sparkled, and the scent of mint rose where they'd stepped. Somewhere far off, a woodpecker tapped rhythmically, the steady heartbeat of the woods. Wren finished her oatcake and leaned back, paws folded neatly. "You know, this might be the best spot in the valley," she said. "You can see everything that matters from here: water, trees, sky. Nothing fancier needed." Pip nodded. "It does feel settled, doesn't it?" "Exactly that," Wren said. Settled. A few moments later, they were joined by Marnie the toad, who lived in a little hollow at the edge of the brook. She arrived carrying a tiny basket of her own, filled with mushrooms she'd gathered before the rain. "Morning to you both," she croaked warmly. "I thought I smelled oatcakes." "Help yourself," Wren said, nudging the basket toward her. Marnie accepted one with a grateful hum. "Ah, still warm. You've outdone yourself again, Wren." "I do try," Wren said, though she was secretly pleased. Marnie settled herself carefully beside them, the bench creaking faintly under her sturdy weight. "You know," she said after a bite, "these damp mornings make me think of soup. Mushroom, maybe, with thyme and a bit of cream." "That sounds wonderful," Pip said dreamily. I might make some this evening, Marnie said. You two should come by. There'll be plenty. They agreed, and the promise of soup hung warmly between them, like the smell of wood smoke from a far-off hearth. The day passed slowly, in that easy way only the forest knows. The sun rose higher, setting the leaves aglow, gold on beech, copper on oak, and here and there a last defiant green. Small insects glittered over the water, and the occasional frog leapt from the reeds with a soft plop. Wren dozed a little, her kerchief slipping sideways. Pip began to sketch the brook in a small notebook he carried, carefully tracing the way the willow's reflection rippled. Marnie hummed to herself, a low tune like the sound of rain on leaves. When at last the sun began to lean westward, Wren stretched and gathered her things. Well, she said, I'll fetch some barley and cream for your soup, Marnie. Pip, you bring bread. Always, Pip said, closing his notebook. Good. 6 o'clock, then. And don't be late. Soup waits for no one. They all laughed softly at that, and Wren disappeared into the trees, her green kerchief bobbing between the trunks. Pip and Marnie lingered a moment longer, watching the brook slide past. You know, Marnie said, I do believe this bench has its own sort of magic. Not the fairy sort, Pip said quickly. Oh no, she replied. Just the kind that happens when folk come and sit a while. You can feel the peace of it, like the brook itself is listening. Pip nodded, his small eyes thoughtful. Yes, he said softly, I think it is. Then he gathered his umbrella and started homeward, leaving Marnie alone on the bench. The light had gone soft and golden now, the kind that seems to hum gently in the air. She sat there a while, finishing her oat cake, watching the water, letting the quiet settle into her bones. By the time she rose to leave, the first chill of evening had crept into the breeze. She tucked her basket under her arm and smiled down at the empty bench. See you tomorrow, she murmured. And the brook, in its endless whispering way, seemed to murmur back. By the time Marnie reached her burrow that evening, the light had faded into a calm amber gray, and the forest was steeped in that early autumn quiet, when even the wind seems to walk softly. Her little round door was tucked neatly between the roots of a hawthorn tree, and smoke curled from the small chimney like a pale ribbon. Inside, everything was snug and orderly. Shelves lined with clay jars and wicker baskets filled the curved walls. Bundles of herbs, rosemary, thyme, and sweet marjoram, hung from the rafters, and the air was warm with their scent. Marnie set her basket on the table, took off her damp shawl, and started the fire. The flames caught easily. She filled her pot with brook water and began to prepare her soup, humming low as she chopped. The mushrooms she'd gathered were plump and clean, smelling faintly of earth and rain. She sliced them finely, added a bit of onion, a pinch of salt, and a handful of thyme leaves. The pot began to hiss and murmur, sending up the rich, woodsy aroma that made her kitchen feel alive. As the soup simmered, she tidied the table, laid out 3 bowls, and fetched a small loaf of brown bread from her pantry. She smiled as she worked. Marnie was happiest when her burrow was full of friends and food and laughter echoing off the curved walls. By the time Wren arrived, the burrow was glowing. You can smell that halfway across the meadow, Wren said, stepping inside and shaking the chill from her fur. She carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth, barley, and a jar of cream. You're right on time, Marnie said, taking them. The soup's nearly ready. Pip's not far behind, I expect. Wouldn't miss a meal if the sky fell in, Wren said, grinning. Moments later, a polite knock sounded at the door. There he is, Marnie said. Pip entered with his usual shy smile, carrying a round loaf still warm from his oven. The smell of baked grain filled the room, mingling beautifully with the scent of simmering soup. They settled in as Marnie ladled the thick, creamy broth into bowls, topping each with a drizzle of cream and a sprig of thyme. The bread was sliced, the butter softened, and the first spoonfuls brought a satisfied silence. "This," Rin said finally, "is perfection." "It's the time," Marnie said modestly. "That and a patient hand." Pip nodded between bites. "Warm soup, good company. That's all anyone needs, really." The firelight flickered across their faces, making the little burrow seem even smaller and cozier. Outside, the forest darkened, and a slow rain began to fall again, tapping softly on the leaves above. They spoke quietly of small things, the best kind of conversation for evenings like this. Rin told them about a patch of mint she'd found near the hollow pond. Pip mentioned he'd seen swans returning early that morning. Marnie listened, occasionally stirring the fire or passing another slice of bread. After they'd eaten their fill, Rin leaned back with a contented sigh. "If I ate like this every day, I'd never leave home again." "You'd get restless after a week," Marnie teased. "You're not made for sitting still." "Maybe not," Rin admitted. "But I'd make an exception for soup." Pip chuckled, then grew thoughtful. "It's funny," he said, "how everything feels slower after rain. The brook, the air, even us." "It's a good kind of slow," Marnie said. "The forest catches its breath between seasons." The fire crackled. The rain softened. After a while, they fell into easy silence, the kind that feels like friendship itself, quiet, warm, and steady. When the clock above the hearth chimed softly for 9, Pip stood and brushed crumbs from his vest. "I'd best get back before the path ices." "Thank you, Marnie. That was a proper meal." "Take some with you," Marnie said, filling a small jar. "It'll keep you warm on the way." Rin gathered her things too, wrapping her kerchief tighter around her neck. "Same time tomorrow?" "Of course," Marnie said, smiling. "I'll make something different, perhaps chestnut stew, if I can find enough." They all said their goodnights at the door, and the two friends disappeared into the soft drizzle, their lanterns glowing faintly as they crossed the meadow. Marnie watched them until the lights were swallowed by the trees. Then she closed her door, banked the fire, and sat for a moment by the window. The rain's rhythm was slow and kind, and the smell of soup still lingered in the air. She looked toward the brook, which gleamed faintly in the moonlight through the mist. The bench would be wet now, she thought, empty and quiet, but by morning someone else would come to sit, just as they always did. The forest had its rhythm, not loud or grand, but sure. Meals shared, words traded, paths crossed and crossed again. Marnie smiled softly to herself, feeling the warmth of the evening still glowing inside her. She blew out the lamp, climbed into bed, and listened as the brook murmured through the night, steady and eternal. Tomorrow would bring something new, perhaps a clear sky, perhaps frost, but it would bring it gently, the way the forest always did. And when morning came, the first light would find the brookside bench once more, clean and damp and waiting. When dawn came the next morning, the forest was wrapped in silence and thin white frost. Every leaf, every blade of grass shimmered under a delicate lace of ice. The brook itself had slowed, its edges crusted in clear glass. Though at its heart it still ran soft and sure beneath the surface. The sun, faint and low, scattered shy gold across the mist that hung over the meadow. Rin was awake before the light reached her windows. She was always the first to rise. Something in her nature refused to let the day begin without her. Her burrow, built cleverly into a slope of mossy earth, looked out toward the hazel grove. From her little porch, she could see smoke beginning to curl from Marnie's chimney across the brook. "Well," she said to herself, tugging on her boots, "best see what the morning's up to." Outside, her breath puffed like smoke as she stepped into the crisp air. The frost cracked faintly beneath her paws. She followed the narrow path that led toward the brookside bench, her scarf tucked up to her nose. All around her, the forest gleamed, the brown and gold of autumn now trimmed with silver, as though winter had arrived just to admire the place before settling in for good. When she reached the bench, it sparkled with frost like a thing carved from sugar. She brushed a hand along it, watching the crystals break into tiny stars. "Cold enough to freeze your whiskers off," she muttered cheerfully. Not long after, she heard the soft crunch of paws behind her. Pip appeared, wrapped in his thickest wool coat, his nose pink from the cold. He carried his notebook under one arm. "Morning," he said, his breath fogging the air. "Morning," Wren replied. "You're out early again." "Couldn't sleep," Pip said. "The frost changes the brook's voice." "I wanted to hear it." Wren tilted her head. "Changes it how?" "Listen." They stood side by side. The forest was still, save for the faintest murmuring of the water. But he was right. The brook's voice was different today, softer and slower, like a lullaby sung through glass. Each trickle sounded careful, deliberate, as if the brook were whispering to itself, half dreaming under the ice. Wren smiled. "You hear things no one else does, Pip." He shrugged. "Maybe I just listen longer." They sat on the bench together, their breath rising in twin plumes. Wren reached in her pocket and pulled out 2 small scones wrapped in cloth. "Brought these," she said, handing him one. "Honey and chestnut flour. Bit of an experiment." Pip took a bite and closed his eyes. "That's lovely," he said. "Sweet, but not proud about it." "That's the honey," she said with a grin. "Bran's best batch." The sound of slow footsteps drew their eyes up the path. Marnie, bundled in her thick shawl and carrying a small basket. Frost glimmered along its handle. "Good morning, my dears," she called, her voice warm as tea. "I see you've both beaten me to it." "Couldn't let you have all the frost," Wren said. Marnie joined them, sighing as she settled on the bench. "It's beautiful, isn't it? Cold but kind. The sort of morning that makes you feel grateful to be alive." Pip nodded. "And to be wearing socks." They all laughed softly. The frost glittered like laughter made visible, catching the sunlight as the forest woke around them. Marnie opened her basket. "I brought cinnamon rolls," she said, still warm from the hearth. The smell of them, butter, spice, and something faintly citrus, drifted into the cold air. They broke the rolls apart carefully, steam curling from the soft centers. The sweetness felt almost too rich for the pale world around them, but it was the kind of indulgence that belonged to mornings like these. As they ate, a robin landed nearby, hopping between the frozen grasses. Wren tossed him a crumb, and he puffed his feathers in gratitude. "Do you suppose the animals up north ever tire of snow?" she mused. Marnie shook her head. "No one truly tires of what belongs to them," she said. "The cold is as much a comfort to some as the sun is to others." "That's a nice thought," Pip said. "Maybe that's why we never quite stop missing what's gone, even seasons. The forest feels different without its noise, but I think it's only resting." The morning passed slowly, the 3 of them sitting in quiet companionship as the light crept higher. When at last the frost began to melt and the first droplets fell from the branches, Wren stood and brushed her paws. "I'd better fetch some twine for Bran's. He's been mending hides again," she said, "and I promised I'd help him carry wood for his smoker." "I'll join you," Pip offered. "The path's nicer with company." Marnie smiled, tucking the empty basket under her arm. "And I'll check on my winter bulbs. They'll be wanting a blanket of leaves before the next freeze." They parted ways at the willow bend, each following their familiar paths through the quiet, gleaming world. Bran's clearing lay deeper in the forest, where the trees grew tall and close together. The sun barely reached the ground, and the air smelled faintly of honey and pine. When Wren and Pip arrived, they found the badger outside, wrapped in his thick coat, stacking logs near the hives. He looked up and grinned. "Morning, you two. Mind the slick patch there. Nearly went head over tail myself." Wren stepped carefully around the frozen puddle. "We brought good news," she said. "Marnie's making stew for supper again." "That is good news," Bran said. and I'll trade her a jar of winter honey for it." The hive stood quiet, snow-dusted but sturdy. Bran had covered them with burlap and twine, and the faint hum of bees could still be heard within, slow and steady, like a sleeping heartbeat. "They're resting," Bran said softly. "Won't wake till spring unless there's trouble." "Smart creatures," Pip said. "I wouldn't wake till spring either if I could help it." Ren laughed. "You'd miss your oatcakes." "True," Pip admitted. "Perhaps I'll stay awake after all." They spent the next hour helping Bran carry wood and check the hive covers. The work was simple but pleasant, their breath rising in clouds as they talked. Pip gathered kindling. Ren tied bundles of twine. Bran split logs with careful, measured strokes. When they were done, Bran poured them each a cup of hot mint tea from a flask he kept near the fire pit. It was sweetened with honey, fragrant and warming. They stood together, sipping, the steam rising into the pale air. "You ever notice," Bran said, "how the forest smells different after frost? Cleaner, like it's had a deep breath." "It does," Ren said. "Everything sharpens, even thoughts." Bran smiled. "Then it's a good day for thinking." The sun had climbed to its faint midday height, though it never grew much warmer. Ren could see the brook through the trees, glittering faintly as it wound through the valley. The forest seemed entirely still, yet somehow alive in every breath, every creak of branch and whisper of wind. When they finally started back toward home, the world felt softened, the air gentler, the frost beginning to fade. They said their goodbyes to Bran, promising to bring him stew later, and followed the path back down to the brook. The bench waited for them, half in shade, half in sunlight. Ren paused there, resting a paw on its cold wooden back. "You know," she said, "this place keeps secrets. Every word we've spoken here, it remembers." Pip smiled faintly. "Then it must be very wise by now." "Or very tired," she said. They both laughed, their voices ringing clear in the still air. Above them, a thin line of birds crossed the sky, dark silhouettes against pale gold, heading south, unhurried. The season was changing. It always did. And down below, the forest carried on, quiet, beautiful, and exactly itself. By mid-November, the frost had thickened into a pale crust that lingered long after sunrise. The brook now wore a narrow ribbon of ice along its edge, glimmering faintly even when the clouds hung low. The forest had gone still, not silent, exactly, but muffled. Every sound was softened. The creak of the trees, the faint rustle of dry leaves, the quiet padding of small paws along frozen paths. Marnie was up early again, as was her habit when the air smelled of snow. She stood at her round window, hands wrapped around a cup of nettle tea, watching her little garden huddle under the pale sky. Her herbs were bundled and hung, her bulbs tucked safely in the soil, and her pantry was full. There was a kind of peace in that. She had promised Ren and Pip they'd share supper again tonight. Something hearty to keep out the chill. For that, she needed fresh greens and a handful of carrots from her cold frame. So she pulled on her shawl, took up her basket, and stepped out into the thin light. The ground was crisp beneath her paws. Frost clung to every stem and bramble, each crystal gleaming like spun glass. Overhead, a robin sang a single, clear note. Not a full song, just a test of the morning air. By the brook, a small movement caught her eye. Pip was there, crouched by the water's edge, sketching something in his notebook. He always looked most at home in that quiet, thoughtful posture. Coat buttoned up tight, ears half hidden by a wool cap, pencil moving gently as if afraid to disturb the world he was drawing. "Morning, Pip," Marnie called. He looked up, smiling. "Morning. You're up early. I could say the same of you," she said, walking closer. "What's caught your eye this time?" He turned the page toward her. It was a sketch of the brook, the thin ice, the slow current beneath, a single leaf trapped halfway between. The drawing was soft and careful, like the morning itself. "It looks cold," she said approvingly. "It is cold," Pip replied with a grin. "My paws have gone 'em twice. Then you'll need something warm tonight. I'm making stew, root vegetables, chestnut, and barley." Pip's eyes brightened. "That sounds perfect. Shall I bring bread?" "Yes, please," Marnie said, "and tell Wren to bring whatever she has left from Bran's hives. I've an idea for something sweet after." "Consider it done," he said, closing his notebook and tucking it under his arm. "I'll stop on my way back from Meadow." They parted there, Marnie toward her garden, Pip toward the hazel grove. By afternoon, the sky had changed. The clouds gathered thick and low, pressing close to the tops of the trees. The light turned silvery, and a hush fell deeper still across the woods. At Wren's burrow, the fire crackled, and the air smelled faintly of beeswax and smoke. She was sorting jars of honey, dark amber, light gold, and a few nearly clear as glass. Each one caught the dim light like captured warmth. When Pip arrived, she waved him in. "Just in time. Help me decide which to take." He set down his sketchbook and inspected the jars carefully. "This one," he said, holding up the darkest. "It tastes like the forest floor after rain." "That's Bran's oak blossom batch," she said proudly. "I'll bring that one then. He'll be glad to know it's well appreciated." As she packed the jar into her basket, Pip's eyes wandered to the window. "It's going to snow soon," he said quietly. Wren followed his gaze. The air had thickened with that particular kind of stillness, the one that comes before snow. "You think it'll last through the night?" He nodded. "Probably. It'll be the first proper snow this season." "Well," Wren said, tying her scarf, "then we'd best make it a warm evening." By twilight, the snow had begun. It came softly, at first as a faint shimmer against the gray sky, then thicker, steadier, a slow drifting of white across the dark branches. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as though the whole world were listening to the soundless fall. Marnie's burrow glowed like a lantern in the dusk. Inside, the table was laid with simple care: wooden bowls, a loaf of bread, 3 spoons, and a pot of stew that filled the room with the scent of thyme, roasted carrots, and chestnut. When a knock came, she opened the door to find Wren and Pip dusted with snow, their fur sparkling faintly. Come in, Marnie said. "You'll freeze solid if you stand out there." They entered, stamping the snow from their boots, and soon the room was alive with warmth again. The soft hum of talk, the quiet laughter that seemed to fit so naturally between them. The stew was thick and rich, the bread warm, the honey sweet and fragrant. They ate slowly, the way friends do when there is nothing to hurry for. When they'd finished, Marnie poured them each a cup of spiced tea, its scent of clove and orange peel filling the air. "Try this," she said, spreading a bit of honey on a small oat biscuit. "It's better than it looks." Wren took a bite, her eyes brightening. "Oh, that's lovely. You should sell these, Marnie." "I'd rather feed them to friends," she said simply. Outside, the snow fell harder, whispering softly against the window. Pip leaned back in his chair, the warmth and fullness of the meal making him drowsy. "You know," he said quietly, "I think there's nothing finer in the world than this. Good food, good fire, and a bit of snow to keep you still." "I'll drink to that," Wren said, raising her cup. Marnie smiled. "And to the forest," she added. "May it keep us close." They clinked their cups together softly, the fire crackling in answer to Z. Later that night, after Wren and Pip had gone, Marnie stepped outside for a breath of cold air. The world was white, the brook half frozen, the trees dusted with snow like powdered sugar. The air smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. She walked to the bench. It was buried now beneath a thin layer of snow, but she brushed it clean with her paw and sat down, letting the quiet surround her. The forest seemed asleep, yet full of life, the kind of life that moves slowly and unseen. The brook murmured under its icy shell. Somewhere far off, a fox called once, and was silent again. She thought of Wren and Pip, of Bran and his hive-sheltered clearing, of all the small lives that made the woods feel whole. The bench creaked softly beneath her as the snow fell, slow and certain, covering every mark and print, turning the forest into something new again. In the stillness, Marnie smiled. There was no need for anything grand or loud. The quiet itself was enough, the steady rhythm of life going on, the forest breathing under snow. She rose at last, brushed the flakes from her shawl, and turned toward home. The light from her window shone warm against the white world, a small promise in the vast calm. Inside, she banked the fire, set her teacup by the bed, and listened as the snow kept falling, patient and endless. Tomorrow, the world would be remade, not changed, only covered, and she too would begin again in the same quiet way. The brook would run, the frost would glitter, and the forest would hold them all, together, in its slow and faithful heart. The next morning dawned softly, the kind of morning where the world seems to hold its breath before moving. The snow had fallen all through the night, steady and unbroken, and now the forest lay beneath a thick white quilt. Every branch wore a crisp outline of snow, and the air glowed faintly blue where the light filtered through. Marnie woke early, as she always did. Her burrow was still and dim, the embers in the hearth barely flickering. She sat up, wrapped herself in her shawl, and peered out the small round window. The world looked completely transformed. The brook was half hidden under snow, though a silver ribbon of water still shone through the ice where it ran fastest. Even the hawthorn above her door bent under the weight of snow, its red berries bright as drops of sealing wax. For a moment she simply watched, feeling that strange hush that follows the first true snow. Not silence, exactly, but the absence of hurry. Then she smiled to herself and went to light the fire. The first crackle of warmth filled the burrow, followed by the sweet scent of wood smoke. Marnie set a small pot to warm and sliced a heel of bread from yesterday's loaf. She spread a thin layer of honey on it, the same oak blossom batch Wren had brought the night before, and sat with her tea at the window. The snow outside sparkled faintly in the morning light, untouched save for the neat little prints of a wren and, farther off, the larger, looping tracks of a hare. The forest was alive, but moving slowly now, as if wrapped in a thick woolen coat. By midday, the sun had climbed just enough to glint off the frozen branches. Marnie decided she ought to check on the path to Wren's and make sure the brook hadn't overflowed with ice. She packed a small basket with sandwiches of cheese and carrot, a flask of hot tea, and a little linen napkin, habits of hers even for short errands, and stepped outside. The air nipped pleasantly at her nose. The snow was deeper than she'd expected, rising almost to her knees in places, but it was soft and light. She moved carefully, listening to the quiet crunch beneath her paws. The forest seemed to glow. Every tree was edged with white, every hollow filled with light and shadow. The brook murmured under its thin crust of ice, sounding almost like a whisper of laughter. When she reached the brookside bench, she stopped and brushed the snow from it with her mittened paw. The wood was cold, but sturdy as ever. She sat for a while, sipping her tea, watching the slow movement of sunlight across the snow. It was the kind of moment that made her chest ache with simple joy, not for anything particular, but for the quiet fact of being there, alive, in the still heart of winter. After a while, she saw movement down the path, a flash of brown against white. Wren came bounding through the snow, scarf streaming, cheeks red from the cold. "Marnie," she called, laughing breathlessly. "You're out early." "Just checking the brook," Marnie said, smiling. "You're up to mischief, I can tell." Wren grinned. "Always. I was bringing Pip a loaf. He says his stove smokes too much to bake, and I can't have him living off apples again." "Goodness, Marnie said. He'll turn into one if he's not careful. They shared the sandwiches and tea right there on the bench, their breath fogging in the crisp air. Funny, Wren said after a while, gazing at the white expanse. How snow makes everything look new, even the paths we've walked 100 times. That's the forest's way of reminding us to notice, Marnie said. It gives us the same world again, but freshly wrapped. Wren nodded thoughtfully. You always say things like that, Marnie. You make it sound like the trees have thoughts of their own. They do, Marnie replied gently. They just think slower than we do. They sat a little longer, sharing the kind of silence that feels companionable, filled not with absence, but with the closeness of knowing someone is near. Eventually, Wren rose and brushed the snow from her coat. I'll bring Pip by later, she said. We'll check the hives on our way. Bran said he saw a stoat nosing around one. Tell him to come for supper, Marnie said. I'll make something warm. Always do, Wren said with a grin, waving as she set off along the path, leaving a neat trail of prints behind her. That afternoon, the snow began again, fine flakes, slow and steady. Marnie worked by the fire, trimming candle wicks and sorting herbs, while the burrow filled with the soft hum of the kettle. Outside, the light dimmed, and the forest grew quiet once more. By evening, there was another knock at her door. Wren and Pip stood there, snow-dusted and smiling, carrying a small basket between them. Bran sends stew, Wren announced. Said you shouldn't always be the one feeding us. Marnie laughed, taking the basket. He's kind to say so. Come in. You'll catch your death out there. Inside, the warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. The three of them set the table, ladling out Bran's rich root stew and adding slices of Marnie's bread. They ate slowly, quietly, the snow whispering at the window, the fire murmuring low. When they finished, Pip reached into his coat and pulled out his notebook. I've been writing something, he said shyly. Not a story, exactly, just notes. About the brook, about how it sounds in winter. He read a few lines aloud. His words were simple but full of care, describing how the ice changed the water's voice, how snow muffled the air, how warmth in small rooms made the world outside seem endless and kind. When he finished, the others sat in quiet appreciation. It's beautiful, Marnie said softly. Wren nodded. It sounds like how it feels to be here. Pip smiled a little, embarrassed. That's all I wanted it to do. The snow kept falling through the night, each flake catching the firelight as it drifted past the window. They sat together until the candles burned low, talking in soft voices about small things. What they'd cook tomorrow, whether the robin would stay through winter, if the brook would freeze completely this year. Nothing urgent, nothing grand. Just the gentle weave of friendship that warmed the long winter nights. And when at last they said their good nights and stepped out into the snow, the world seemed to glow around them. Every branch and path bathed in soft light, the brook whispering quietly beneath its frozen skin. Marnie watched them disappear down the path, their lanterns bobbing like stars between the trees. Then she turned back inside, her heart full and calm. Outside, the snow continued to fall, patient and endless, tucking the forest once more beneath its soft white blanket. And beneath that blanket, everything slept, roots, seeds, and the quiet, beating heart of the woods, waiting for the slow return of spring. The snow did not stop for many days. It came softly at first, then steadily, until every hollow and hill was smoothed over. Paths disappeared, fences vanished, and even the old stone wall by Bran's clearing looked like a long sleeping creature under its white covering. The forest had become a world of shapes and silence, gentle, muted, and endlessly patient. Inside her burrow, Marnie marked the days with small comforts. Each morning she rose before the light, lit the fire, and filled the kettle. She liked to listen to the snow's hush outside while the water began to hum, two rhythms that belonged together. Sometimes she read from one of her worn little books. Sometimes she simply sat and mended a scarf or planned her garden for spring, though that seemed a lifetime away. Every few days, Wren or Pip would visit, leaving neat tracks that crisscrossed the meadow. They never stayed long. The cold made sure of that. But their visits were enough to remind Marnie that even when the forest was still, friendship was alive within it. One morning, she heard a soft knock on her door before she'd even finished her tea. It was Pip, wrapped tightly in his old green coat, a snow-covered bundle under his arm. "You're out early," Marnie said as she opened the door. He smiled sheepishly. "I couldn't sleep. Thought I'd try baking again." He held out a small loaf, round and slightly uneven, but warm. The smell drifted through the doorway. Oats, molasses, and just a hint of cinnamon. "Oh, Pip," Marnie said, taking it with delight. "You've outdone yourself." "It's not much," he said, brushing snow from his cap. "But I thought it'd make the day brighter." "It already has," she said warmly. "Come in and thaw out before you turn to ice." Inside, the fire glowed softly, and Pip's glasses fogged the moment he stepped in. Marnie poured him tea while he stood near the hearth, holding his paws toward the flames. "Wren said she might come by later," Marnie said. "She's been visiting Bran's hives again." "Checking for tracks?" Pip asked. "Yes. Stoats and foxes have been bold lately. She worries for the bees." "They'll be all right," Pip said gently. "Bran knows how to keep them safe." Marnie nodded, then sliced the loaf. The crust cracked just right, and the crumb inside was soft and fragrant. They ate it with a bit of butter and talked quietly about the snow, how it had changed the sound of the forest, how even familiar places felt newly strange. "Everything's slower," Pip said thoughtfully. "Even thoughts. That's the gift of winter," Marnie said. "It makes you patient." Pip smiled. "And you've always been better at patience than I." By midday, Wren arrived in a flurry of snow and good cheer, shaking off her scarf as she came in. "It's bitter out," she said, stamping her paws. "The kind of cold that makes your whiskers ache." "There," Marnie offered. "Yes, please. I could drink a river." As she settled by the fire, Wren's eyes caught the half-eaten loaf. "Ah, so that's where the smell came from." "Pip's been busy. Experimenting," Pip said modestly. "Deliciously," Marnie added. Wren grinned. "You should open a bakery, Pip. The Brookside Oven, I'd call it. You'd have a line from here to Bran's." Pip laughed. "Only if you promise to handle the customers. I'd sooner talk to the bread." The three of them sat a while, the kind of easy company that needed no effort. Outside, snow drifted past the window, and the faint sound of the brook could still be heard beneath the ice, soft, steady, faithful. When the kettle emptied, Wren stood and peered out the window. "The light's changing," she said. "Storm's coming." She was right. The gray above the trees had thickened, darkening at the edges. The stillness deepened. "I'd better see Bran before it starts," she said, pulling her scarf back up. "He'll need help covering the hives." "I'll come," Pip said, reaching for his coat. "Take a jar of soup with you," Marnie said, already ladling it into a tin. "He never eats properly when the weather turns." They thanked her, promised to return by evening, and disappeared into the soft, white world outside. The storm came slowly. First the wind, sighing through the hawthorn, then the flakes, big and heavy, falling in thick curtains that blurred the distance. Marnie shut her shutters against the worst of it, but left one cracked open so she could still see the world dimming to gray. By late afternoon, the snow was deep enough to bury her front step. She banked the fire higher and listened to the storm's low murmur. The kettle steamed quietly beside her. She wondered if Wren and Pip had reached Bran's safely, but she didn't worry. They were clever, and the forest had a way of guiding those who respected it. As dusk crept in, the storm began to ease. The flakes grew lighter, finer, and the sky shifted from gray to a deep, dusky violet. Then, faint but certain, came a knock. She opened the door to find all three of them there. Wren, Pip, and Bran, their coats white with snow. "You'll catch your death," she cried, ushering them in. "Couldn't stay away," Wren said cheerfully, brushing her fur. Bran insisted we see you safe before heading home. "Storm nearly buried the path," Bran added. "But it's easing now. Then you'll all stay for supper," Marnie said firmly. "No arguments." Bran smiled his slow, steady smile. "Wouldn't dream of it." The burrow filled quickly with warmth and chatter. Bran hung his coat near the fire, his great paws careful not to scatter melting snow. Wren fetched the bread, Pip set the table, and Marnie ladled out her thick barley stew. It steamed in the bowls, smelling of thyme and turnip and something faintly sweet. They ate well, laughing between mouthfuls. Bran told a story about a squirrel who'd mistaken his hives for acorn stores, and Wren nearly choked on her tea from laughing. Pip shared his new sketches, quiet studies of the frozen brook, of the way light bent through icicles, and Marnie promised to frame one for her wall. Outside, the snow stopped at last. The wind calmed. The world went still. After supper, they sat together before the fire. Bran dozed in his chair, his slow breathing keeping rhythm with the fire's crackle. Pip scribbled quietly in his notebook. Wren sat by the window, watching the moon rise over the frozen world. Its light spread across the snow like spilled milk, soft and endless. "It looks like another world," she murmured. "It is," Marnie said softly. "The same one, but gentler for the cold." Pip looked up from his writing. "Do you ever think about how the forest sounds to those who aren't here? How empty it must seem?" "I think," Marnie said, "it's only quiet if you don't know how to listen." The next morning was clear, bright, and blue, the kind of morning that makes the snow sparkle like diamonds. The storm had passed, leaving the world reborn. The brook ran in narrow channels through the ice, glinting in the sunlight. Small birds flitted from branch to branch, shaking loose tiny clouds of snow. Marnie's burrow was full of the smell of porridge and pinewood smoke. Wren and Pip had stayed the night, curled up by the hearth. Bran had gone home early, leaving deep, tidy tracks in the snow. When Pip stirred, blinking in the light, Marnie handed him a bowl. "Eat before it cools. You've a walk ahead of you." He murmured, stretching. "Feels like spring's 1,000 years away." "It always does," she said with a smile. Then suddenly it's there. Wren sat up, hair mussed, still half asleep. "If it's spring you're talking about, wake me when it arrives." They laughed quietly, the morning soft and slow around them. After breakfast, they walked together to the bench. The air was crisp, their breath white against the blue. The forest sparkled, the snow untouched except for their trail. The bench itself was half buried again, but Marnie brushed it clean and they sat, cups of tea steaming between their paws. "Do you ever wonder," Pip said suddenly, "how many winters this bench has seen?" "More than we have," Marnie said. "It was old when I was young." "It's patient," Wren said, running a paw along its surface. "It waits through every season, never hurrying." "That's why it belongs here," Marnie said. "It knows how to listen." They sat for a long time in silence, watching the brook's slow movement beneath the ice, the sunlight dancing on snow. Somewhere far off, a woodpecker began to tap at a frozen trunk, steady and sure. Wren sighed happily. "If the world ended tomorrow, I'd still be glad I saw this morning." Marnie smiled. "That's the trick, dear, to be glad while it's happening." Pip closed his notebook and looked up at the pale winter sky. "Then I'll write that down," he said softly, "before I forget." That evening, the snow turned faintly pink in the setting sun. Smoke curled from every chimney. The smell of stews and baking bread drifted faintly across the cold air. The forest, for all its stillness, seemed full of life, of warmth, of quiet joy. In her burrow, Marnie set a lamp in the window, as she always did, a small light for any traveler on the snowy path. It glowed softly through the night, golden against the white, a promise that warmth and company were never far away. And beneath that light, the forest breathed slow and sure, the deep heart of winter beating on, steady as the brook, kind as friendship, endless as the snow. The end. Thank you for wandering through the woods with me. If you'd like to return for more quiet stories and soft moments, don't forget to follow the trail back. Like, subscribe, and I'll meet you again under the green canopy soon.